Have you ever noticed how you keep finding yourself in the same kinds of situations, even though you promised yourself you wouldn't repeat old mistakes? Maybe you swore you'd never date someone who makes you feel small, but months later, you're in a relationship that looks eerily similar to the last one. Or maybe you told yourself you'd stop saying yes to every extra project at work, yet here you are, exhausted, with another pile of tasks that don't belong to you. It's as if some invisible hand keeps steering you back to the same crossroads, no matter how much you think you've moved on. That invisible hand is what psychologists might call your psychological baggage. Just like a traveler dragging a heavy suitcase through an airport, you're carrying emotional luggage from the past, unfinished stories, hidden beliefs, unhealed experiences that quietly shape your choices today. And the tricky part is, you may not even realize it's there, because unlike a real suitcase, psychological baggage doesn't sit in plain view. It hides in the background of your decisions, whispering suggestions that feel like instincts, but often are old patterns replaying themselves. So what exactly is this baggage? Think of it as a collection of unfinished business. Psychologists often use the concept of unfinished gestalt, the idea that unresolved experiences don't simply vanish, they linger in your mind, waiting for closure. For example, if you grew up in an environment where expressing your feelings was met with criticism, you might carry an unconscious belief that showing emotions is dangerous. Years later, in a completely different setting, you still find yourself holding back tears in front of a supportive friend or avoiding difficult conversations with your partner. The situation has changed, but the past belief remains packed neatly in your suitcase. This is why past experiences feel like they are hiding inside your present decisions. They are not gone, just stored, waiting for your attention. The metaphor of baggage is useful because it's intuitive. Imagine trying to walk forward while carrying a giant overloaded suitcase. You can move, but slowly and with effort. Your past doesn't paralyze you, but it slows you down, making every new step heavier than it needs to be. And the contents of that suitcase are not always obvious. Some are heavy items like unresolved grief, betrayal, or childhood trauma. Others are small, almost weightless, like a teacher's offhand remark that you weren't creative enough, which you forgot but now makes you hesitate to draw or write as an adult. Individually, these items may not seem like much, but together they add up, creating a weight that quietly influences every choice you make. What makes psychological baggage especially tricky is that it often disguises itself as logic. You might say, "I just have high standards," when really you're afraid of intimacy because of an old heartbreak. Or, "I'm just being responsible," when in fact you're driven by a fear of disappointing others that you learned as a child. In these moments, the past is not only present, it's masquerading as rational thought. And unless you take a closer look, you might never realize you're making decisions based on outdated information. It's like using an old map from a city you left years ago. You're still following the streets, but they don't match the territory anymore. To understand why this happens, let's zoom into how the brain works. Memory is not a static archive, like folders neatly labeled and stored away. Instead, it's more like a dynamic construction site. Each time you remember something, your brain reconstructs it from fragments, emotions, sensory details, lessons you learned at the time. And because emotions are powerful glue, negative or intense experiences tend to stick more firmly. Your brain interprets them as important survival lessons. Don't forget this. It could help you avoid pain next time. That's why even a single betrayal or failure can leave a long-lasting mark, creating a hidden lens through which you interpret future experiences. The lens is not visible, but it colors what you see. Without realizing it, you're not reacting to the present moment. You're reacting to the echoes of the past. Now, you might wonder, why can't we just drop the suitcase and walk away? The answer lies in the mind's drive for closure. The brain doesn't like open loops. It prefers stories with endings. When something unresolved happens, a conversation left unfinished, a relationship ending without explanation, a mistake you never forgave yourself for, it remains open. Your psyche holds onto it in the hope of eventually resolving it. This is both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it keeps you attentive, reminding you of lessons you may need. On the other hand, if resolution never comes, the weight persists indefinitely. You keep checking the suitcase, carrying it everywhere, even into situations where it doesn't belong. Here's an example you might recognize. You're at work and your boss gives you neutral feedback. Nothing harsh, just constructive. But suddenly your chest tightens and you feel defensive. Why? Because years ago, maybe in school or in a previous job, criticism was associated with shame or humiliation. The past baggage is triggered, and now the present moment feels bigger and heavier than it really is. Or consider relationships. Perhaps you hesitate to fully trust your partner because of a betrayal in the past. Even though they haven't done anything wrong, your suitcase is full of fear that people I love will leave. These hidden beliefs steer your choices, often without you noticing. So what can you actually do about it? First, you need to identify what's inside your suitcase. One powerful tool is reflection. Pay attention to situations where your emotional reaction seems stronger than the event warrants. If a small criticism feels like a personal attack, or a minor conflict feels like abandonment, it's a sign that old baggage has been triggered. Journaling can help here. Ask yourself questions like, when have I felt this way before? Or, what does this remind me of? Often you'll find the roots go deeper than the current situation. The simple act of naming the connection, realizing that your fear of speaking up today is tied to being laughed at years ago, already loosens the suitcase's grip. Second, imagine yourself literally unpacking the suitcase. Visualization is a surprisingly effective tool. Picture opening it and looking at the contents. Maybe a childhood memory, a painful breakup, a failure you've never fully forgiven yourself for. Then ask, do I still need to carry this? Sometimes the answer is yes. You're not ready to let go yet, and that's okay. But sometimes you'll realize you've been carrying a lesson long after its usefulness has expired. Just like you wouldn't drag around old clothes that don't fit, you don't have to carry beliefs or fears that no longer serve you. Third, practice what psychologists call reframing. Instead of seeing the baggage as proof of weakness, treat it as raw material for growth. That heartbreak you never forgot? It may have made you more empathetic, more discerning. That childhood fear of disapproval? It may have taught you resilience or independence. The point is not to glorify the pain, but to reclaim the lessons it gave you, so you can put them back into your suitcase in a lighter form. In other words, you're not erasing your past, you're repacking it. And finally, recognize that some baggage is too heavy to carry alone. Just as travelers sometimes need help lifting a suitcase onto the rack, you may need support. From therapy, from trusted friends, from mentors. There is no shame in that. In fact, it's often the most responsible choice. Because when you ask for help, you're not just lightening your load, you're learning how to walk forward without being dragged back. As you reflect on all this, remember, everyone has psychological baggage. It's not a flaw, it's part of being human. What matters is not whether you carry it, but how consciously you do. You can drag it blindly through every decision, letting it shape your life without your awareness. Or you can open it up, examine what's inside, and choose deliberately what to keep and what to set down. The suitcase will never be empty. Life ensures that. But it can become lighter, more manageable, and less of an obstacle on your path. Another way to approach psychological baggage is to notice how it shows up in patterns. Think of it like this. If you keep bumping into the same kind of wall, it's worth asking whether the wall is really in front of you or inside you. For example, maybe you consistently attract friends who lean on you for emotional support, but vanish when you need help. On the surface, it looks like bad luck or poor judgment. But if you dig deeper, you may find an old pattern. Perhaps as a child you were rewarded for being the strong one in your family, so you unconsciously gravitate towards situations where you carry others' weight. Without realizing it, you're replaying the past. The pattern feels familiar, and the familiar feels safe, even if it's painful. Recognizing this dynamic is a crucial step toward change, because awareness creates choice. Until you see the suitcase you're dragging, you can't decide whether to put it down. One helpful practice is what I'd call a pattern inventory. Over the course of a week, notice situations that trigger strong emotions: anger, shame, guilt, fear. Write them down, then ask, what do these experiences have in common? You may notice that very different situations share the same emotional undertone. For instance, criticism at work, a partner's sigh of disappointment, and a friend canceling plans might all trigger the same sinking feeling of, I'm not enough. That repetition is a clue. Your suitcase has a label on it and it says fear of inadequacy. Once you name it, the grip it has on your choices loosens. Because now, instead of blindly reacting, you can pause and ask, am I responding to this moment, or am I carrying my past into it? The next step is learning how to lighten the load. One simple but powerful tool is self-compassion. Think of how you would treat a friend if they confessed to making the same mistake over and over. You wouldn't say, what's wrong with you? You'd probably say something like, it makes sense, you've been through a lot, but you can learn. Yet, when it comes to ourselves, we often choose the harshest voice in the room. That inner critic is like adding extra bricks to your suitcase. By practicing self-compassion, literally speaking to yourself with the same kindness you'd extend to someone else, you remove some of those bricks. Research in psychology shows that self-compassion doesn't make you complacent. It actually makes you more resilient and more willing to change. Because instead of being trapped in shame, you create space to grow. Another method is reauthoring your story. Every piece of baggage has a narrative attached. I always fail. People can't be trusted. I'm unlovable. These aren't just thoughts, they're scripts that your mind runs in the background. But the truth is, stories can be rewritten. Start by identifying the old script, then challenge it by finding counterexamples. If your suitcase says, I always fail, recall times when you succeeded, even in small ways. If it says, people can't be trusted, remember relationships, past or present, that have proven the opposite. This isn't about pretending the pain didn't happen. It's about expanding your narrative so it's not defined by one chapter. You're not erasing the old story, but adding new pages that balance it. Over time, the suitcase becomes lighter, not because the past disappears, but because it no longer dictates the entire plot. Some baggage requires a more embodied approach. Emotional memories are not just stored in your mind, they often live in your body. That knot in your stomach before a meeting, the tightness in your chest during conflict, the heaviness in your shoulders when you think about your family. All of these are ways your body carries history. Practices like mindfulness, breathwork, or even simply pausing to notice physical sensations can help you bring unconscious baggage into awareness. For instance, the next time you feel tension rising, instead of suppressing it, pause and ask, what is this tension trying to protect me from? When have I felt this before? By connecting the physical sensation with past experiences, you create a bridge between body and mind, which is often where the heaviest baggage hides. It's also worth considering the philosophy of what it means to carry baggage. Thinkers throughout history have wrestled with the question of whether the past defines us. The Stoics, for example, believed that while we cannot control external events, we can control our judgments about them. Applied here, that means you don't have to deny the weight of your suitcase, but you can choose how to interpret it. A failed relationship doesn't have to mean I am unworthy. It could instead mean I learned what I value in a partner. Existentialist philosophers took this further, suggesting that freedom comes from taking responsibility for your past without being imprisoned by it. Your suitcase may be full, but you are the one who decides whether to drag it endlessly or to unpack it and travel lighter. Of course, none of this happens overnight. Unpacking psychological baggage is not a single dramatic act. It's a practice. You will slip, repeat old patterns, and pick up the suitcase again without realizing it. That's normal. The point is not perfection, but progress. Each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you choose differently, you lighten the load a little more. Over months and years, those small choices add up, until what once felt like a burden becomes a set of lessons you carry with purpose, not weight. So here's a practical exercise to try this week. Pick one small recurring pattern you've noticed, and instead of trying to eliminate it, get curious about it. When it arises, pause and ask, what's in my suitcase that makes me react this way? Then, write down one way you could respond differently, even if it's tiny. Maybe it's saying no once when you'd usually say yes. Maybe it's pausing before apologizing automatically. These micro choices are like taking out one item at a time. Slowly, the suitcase becomes less crowded. Ultimately, psychological baggage isn't something to be ashamed of. It's proof that you've lived, that you've experienced, that you've carried lessons forward. But carrying doesn't mean being trapped. You can unpack, repack, and travel lighter. The goal is not to erase the past, but to integrate it, so it becomes a resource rather than a burden. Because when you stop being unconsciously driven by yesterday, you open space for today, and for the future you actually want to create. And if this exploration gave you a new perspective on the weight you're carrying, share it with someone who might also need to hear it. And remember to subscribe to Mind Unlocked, where we turn insights from psychology, philosophy, and neuroscience into practical tools for better thinking. Your weekly toolkit for traveling through life with more clarity, freedom, and intention.